Hey everyone, it's Matthew. Welcome to MatthewSpencer.tv. I wanted to do what the Germans would call a Sitz im Leben video. Now, what does that mean for you English speakers? Well, you're probably like, I don't know what a Sitz im Leben is. I have no idea. Wonder if the microphone's working. Now it's not. Okay, what is Sitz im Leben? A Sitz im Leben means the current life situation. And I was actually one of my favorite saints is St. Patrick. And I have a book called The Confessions of St. Patrick. And it has a very fascinating preface by a guy named John Skinner. And he's the one, I think, who translated it. And it was very, very academic, very intellectual. And he kind of, the way he writes, he doesn't sound like he's an actual believer. So you have to kind of weed that out. He maybe he's a Christian culture, but he's more academic. But anyway, he's talking about St. Patrick and how the world at the time, it's important for historians, when we're reading history, we don't quite understand what the people are going through. What is the world? What is the world situation? Political, geopolitical, military, economic, all this stuff. So when we're talking about Sitz im Leben, that means the position in life right now. Like for instance, if you're going to talk about my life, you're going to say, well, Matthew's living in Longmont and Matthew's 35 and like all these different things that are, what are the things we're experiencing? What kind of technologies do we have access to? What kind of, geopolitical things are happening? Because that all affects what we're going through and how we think, the way we think. I just did a creation versus evolution and seminar on Sunday night. You can check that out on the Christchurch International channel with my friend Dave Arns. It was really good. I enjoyed that. But I talked about worldview and how worldview affects us. We don't perceive that sometimes. So anyway, this video, I want to talk about the Sitz im Leben, or what's going on in the world and how I see things right now. Okay. So worldview does affect things. American worldview does affect how we perceive the world. So that's, I guess, the first thing I talk about is our worldview. So there's a lot to talk about nowadays. I mean, one of the things that I've been so fascinated about is Russia. And I know, obviously Russia attacked Ukraine. Was that back in March, which is a horrible thing that's happening. But I think a lot of Americans, our perspective and our worldview is that Russians are evil, period. Like the Russians are the bad guys. If you ever watch a movie or or read a fictional book, like the Russians are always the foil, they're always the nemesis, they're always the villain. If there's a bad guy, he's probably a Russian, and that's kind of our worldview. And I feel that a while back I was looking up Russian history, and it seems like not a lot of English speakers really care about Russian history at all. We don't care about Russia, and so that helps us not understand Russians, not understand where they're coming from, why they're doing what they're doing. And I would actually personally, I'm going to get political in this conversation here. Is I think the Obama administration and the State Department have really dug their heels in, and they have this group think that the Russians are the bad guys. And there's a documentary. I started to watch it. I couldn't watch it because it had so many bad images. And I was like, this is like R-rated. I can't watch this. But it's called Ukraine on Fire. And it's probably very controversial, but it talks about how the State Department really tried to play kingmaker and do some pretty crazy things. They tried to play kingmaker, and they unseated a pro-Russian government to destabilize Ukraine. So there's a lot of things going on in Ukraine that don't meet the eye. The things that are happening in Ukraine, that doesn't meet the eye. There's a lot of things going behind the scenes that we don't understand. In German, they say hinter den Kulissen, behind the scenes, behind the curtain. Don't always believe the surface of everything. So needless to say, I've been kind of skeptical of the Western media's reporting on the whole Ukraine-Russian crisis. Of course, with the the disease that was very influential in our lives in 2020, and all the all this kind of stuff that they did to people, it really affected people's trust in the journalism, trust in the government. Are they telling us truth? Are they telling us lies? Or what is the expression? Are they being intellectually dishonest? you know. So I think there's a lot of incredulity that we need to move forward with in this whole, um, watching the media and watching what are they saying about Russia. So I read. So one of the things I think is funny is if you want to know what I'm trying to say is if you want to know what somebody thinks, if you want to know what a man thinks, you should actually read what he writes. Doesn't that make sense? Because if a man or a woman decide they're going to go out of their way to write something down, think about something, what's going on up the old bean. I think that you're going to understand what they're thinking about, what they've meditated on, what's in their heart. So I read, and I think it might have been right before. It was so fascinating, guys. I was really interested in Russia. A couple of years ago, I got this fascination for Russia. And then I've been watching the Putin videos, just like, who is this guy? What does he do? Why does he do things the way he does? I was really interested in learning about Russian history, Russia, just kind of, casually, watching YouTube videos. And then all of a sudden, this whole thing comes out about, is Russia going to attack Ukraine? And then they did. And it was like, I kind of felt like I had a front row seat watching this stuff unfold before my eyes. And it was just like, wow. But I did read, and I forget if it might have been in February. Yeah, it was actually January, February. I was reading 2 books. One was on the conquest of the New World, which is really hard to read, about the conquest of Mexico, Cortez. And then I was also reading I decided I wanted to read Putin's, he wrote a 21-page essay on basically his thinking of, what is he thinking? And he wrote like a 21-page essay, 1921 pages on basically reunifying the Russian peoples, and he called them the triune peoples of Belarus, Ukraine, and Russia. So, when people say things about world leaders like, this guy's a madman, or he's just irrational, like you'd hear that a lot about President Trump, for instance. They say, this man's irrational. He doesn't know what he's doing. He does all things irrationally. It's like, well, have you ever read his books? Like, if you want to know what he's thinking, read his books, because he's very logical and he has very good thoughts. He might seem a bit haphazard, but he has a lot of good thoughts. Now, this is probably a horrible comparison, Trump and Putin, because Putin is turning out to be he's a dictator. Okay. I don't think Trump is. Trump is a freedom fighter, peace-loving American who's actually calling for peace now. He actually tweeted on True Social. He's like, hey, he said something about even helping out negotiate a peace deal with anybody could negotiate something Trump could. So I think the comparison between Trump and Putin those parallels should not be drawn. They're two different men. Putin is actually a dictator, and he's running a Russian. He's a czar. He's not communist. He's a czar. And there's a reemergence of the Russian Empire is what we were seeing before our eyes. There's some prophetic things that have happened too in that area. But anyway, so this is my Sitz im Leben. So I'm just sharing with you the things I'm thinking about. I got a Bible study coming here in a few minutes. But so the whole Russian thing has just been so fascinating. But like Putin, he wants to reunite the Russian-speaking people. Okay, and I have some Russian friends. I was playing hockey earlier this year, and some Russian friends. And I think the analogy I used was, I said basically this. I said, hey, I think the example of Ukraine joining up with NATO and the EU, aligning themselves more with the West, is like an example of your little sister deciding that she's going to go run off and marry a really, really bad person. And so I feel like a guy that's really bad, who knows, maybe abusive or whatever. And you're the older brother. This is how Russians are thinking. So I'm not necessarily justifying the war in Ukraine. I'm not patting Putin on the back because there are bad things happening. I'm skeptical of what is actually happening because I don't trust the media, and I don't trust our government. I don't trust the State Department. I don't trust the EU. I don't trust Brussels. And I don't trust Putin either. Okay. So, and Ukraine's stuck in between. So it's like Putin and Russia, they're like the big brother, and they're seeing that Ukraine could be irrevocably married to the West. And basically he said, we're not going to put up for it. We're not going to put up for it. We cannot have our little sister, Ukraine, marry the West, because this is like, you bring out analogy of Romeo and Juliet. Okay, you had the two families that were feuding. There's been a feud going, a lot of bad blood between the West and Russia. Poland and Russia has a lot of bad blood. Poland actually, I was reading, Poland, I think, was part of a coalition that actually had invaded Moscow at the time. And I don't know my European history to know that much, but there's, of course, Russia, and, took over Poland and all that, so, communism was over those areas for so long. So there's a lot of bad blood between them. So it's like Romeo and Juliet, where Juliet decides she's going to marry somebody from the family that you've hated all your life, right? And so that's kind of how the Russians think of things, I think. Check. I hope this microphone is working. So that's kind of how I think they're kind of like, we got to prevent our little sister from marrying this guy because he's a horrible person, right? And so Putin had to step in and say now or never. Of course, the West is totally gone crazy. We're like warmongering. And, with the Nordstream pipeline that actually ruptured on, I think it was, crazy thing is it was on like Rosh Hashanah, that Monday of September 2022, which is the Feast of Trumpets, which is like, what? This is like a prophetic season, like something crazy happens. Like, you guys, that stuff is war level stuff. That is war level possibilities. When things start happening, and Europe is also, they're facing an energy crisis like no other. I just heard last night that hundreds of thousands of people could die because of no heat in Europe this winter. Like, this is a crisis. This sort of thing spur wars to happen. Of course, we got to pray against wars. But I think Putin he's got them played. He's got them exactly where they want him. He knows what he's doing. He is reclaiming Kiev. If you look at Russian history, one of his justifications was Kiev was the original capital of the Russian people. The Russian, what do they call? What is that word? The word, I'm getting words in German because for some reason that's the words I'm getting, and they're not quite accurate in English to the English speakers. There was a German word that they used. I think it was Nazi Germany, which was like Raum. It was like, it meant room to grow in Nazi German. And I'm grasping for the word LebensRaum. Okay, so that LebensRaum is a bad connotation, but that's not what I'm trying to go for. What LebensRaum means room for living, and that's what I think. If I get my history right, the Nazis were claiming they needed more room to grow their empire, right? So I think what is happening though is, if I think of the word, I need to get it down, but it's basically the Russian-speaking realm, the Russian-speaking world, and they are asserting sovereignty over the Slavic world. And that's what Putin is doing, is he's saying, hey, I'm going to assert sovereign authority over the Ukrainian people, over the Belarusian people, over the Russian people. Those are what he called the triune Russian peoples. The Russians, the white Russians, those are the Belarusians, and the Ukrainians. And if you look at your history, and he cited all this, he said, 990 AD, there was a Christianization of the Slavic Rus, where they got baptized, and the Russian king, I think it was Vladimir, what was his name? The Christianization of the Rus, if you look at it, the Kievan Rus. So this is Kiev was actually the heart of all this. Who was the king at the time? Was it Vladimir? It's important to know your history, guys. So this king, what he did is he wanted to marry. You got baptism of Saint Olga. See, Westerners don't care about all this. We don't care because we don't care about Russia, and I'll tell you why. I think the reason why is because the Western Roman Empire split from the Eastern Roman Empire, which is Byzantium, Constantinople, Greece versus Rome, those two different, the clashing. And then Russia really spread from that split, which goes to the Daniel prophecy or the dream of Nebuchadnezzar, which is the statue, the two legs and the feet, and the clay and the iron, which I think I heard Perry Stone talk on that one time. That was really, really good. So that's what we have, is the split of the East and the West in the empire. And we still have that happening. You have the Western democracies, which are weak and soft. You have the Eastern democracies, which are more totalitarian, not really democracies. So there's the strength in the Church of the East that the West doesn't have, right or wrong. Oh, that's another thing. In Ukraine, there's been a split in the church with the Russian church, and there's very patriarchal. They're very much like, you don't cross the dad, you do what you're told, and the church is very much part of, the Russian church is very much part of the government. So that's another interesting thing. Of course, we have the separation of church and state here. No state religion, whereas in Russia and England, you still have the state religion. Putin himself he's an Orthodox Christian. You can watch him baptize himself in commemoration of the Kievan Rus, that event that I just talked about back in the year of, what was that? 867. Well, back then, so in Saint Vladimir, actually, so that's a connection to Putin's name. I wonder if he, sees Saint Vladimir, who basically he got converted. He put away all his pagan wives. He married one Christian wife, which I think is evidence of his conversion, his genuine conversion. He married the emperor of the Eastern Roman Empire, and he married his sister, and he got baptized in Constantinople, which is now Istanbul. Istanbul is now Constantinople. Anyway, so these are just interesting things that I've kind of caught up over this time. So the world is in a crazy situation. It's in a crazy situation. You have resurgence of nationalism happening. American nationalism, Italian nationalism, a prime minister who they're demonizing as hard right, Trump of Italy, a woman just got elected who's going to stand for God, family, and faith. And so Europe is really getting shaken up too. And of course, there's so many crazy things in this world. One of the verses I have, Galatians 5:1, says, "Stand fast, therefore, in the liberty wherewith Christ has made you free. Do not be enslaved again under the yoke of bondage." And also the Bible says that where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. So it's very important for us to stand in our liberties. 2 Corinthians 3:17. Now the Lord is the Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. So we are to stand on our liberties like never before. Never before. We have to stand on our liberties. So back to Russia for a minute here. I got to wrap this up. Back to Russia. Russia is rising. The Russians are coming. They are coming. And you know what? The West is saying, they're losing, or there's this counteroffensive. You guys, they're going to defeat Ukraine. Unless we want to get into some nuclear war, which nobody wants. And it's shocking that the Western leaders are sending Ukrainians weapons. Which, you guys, if you are Ukrainian, God bless you. I feel for you. And I know there's many Christians and brothers and sisters there, but this is more of a geopolitical world level thing. Is Ukraine is lost. Ukraine is being taken over by Russia. Unless we want to get into a nuclear Holocaust war, the correct response from America and European Union and NATO is we are not going to put any weapons in Ukraine. There's rumors that I've been watching videos from different channels, and they think that maybe we have special forces or operatives in Ukraine. We should not have sent them any weapons, no ammunition, no rockets, nothing other than medical, humanitarian, at the worst, helmets and, body armor. But we should not be sending anything that would provoke the Russians to a war. And that's the thing. And it's a horrible thing, is that one of the true reality, I never heard anybody talk about this in this way. I got it from somewhere, but my point is there's such a thing in world politics called the buffer state. And that if you look at Nepal, if you look at Hawaii, if you look at Ukraine, those are all buffer states. They are never going to be sovereign powers. uh, of their own because they're sandwiched between global powers. So if you have, like, for instance, Nepal doesn't have any trains. There's no railways there because China is at the north and India is at the south. Pakistan is to the west. So the problem is they're not going to have their. I pray that they will have trains, that God will bless them with infrastructure, but there are sovereign powers around them that don't want it to be easy to cross Nepal because armies come across trains and highways. Of course, they got monsoons and they got earthquakes too, which is a huge and a lot of corrupt politics going on. So there's a lot of problems there that could change. I guess they could become like Switzerland, which if they became independent, they could, defend their own country, keep everybody out, which would probably be best for them. Maybe someday God save Switzerland, save Nepal and make them like Switzerland. Or they could become a bastion for freedom and liberty and Christian values. I pray for that. I haven't before, but just did right now. Ukraine is a plane. It's a great plane. It's in between Russia and Europe. I mean, NATO and Russia, it's between two nuclear powers. And Russia is kind of there's another attitude they kind of have is if we can't have Ukraine, nobody can have Ukraine. I could think that's kind of their attitude. It's kind of course, that's the Western media reporting that there's a scorched earth kind of policy, which that also doesn't make sense because there's so many intermarried families and Ukrainians are Russian and many Russians are Ukrainians. They have families and friends and coworkers and many Russians. I know a Russian who was born in Ukraine. So there's a lot of connection there. And like the sister analogy, I'm not letting my sister marry that guy. I'm not letting my sister marry NATO because it'll be forever. And I can't afford that to happen. It's too valuable. And there's a lot of love there, joint culture, joint poetry. Anyway, and then the third example there of a buffer state is Hawaii. I was talking to some friends in Hawaii when I was there in June, and they said there are genuine Christian evangelical movements that are nationalistic Hawaiians, where they believe biblically, scripturally, Hawaii should be independent. And I would say, God bless you. But the problem is, and take the white man out of this, take the abuses of the missionaries out of this. Yes, those things were bad. But maybe my microphone's not turned up high enough. No, it is. Okay. The abuses are bad, but if you think on a geopolitical level, Hawaii's a buffer state. So if America were to give up Hawaii, Hawaii would be taken over by China or Japan because Hawaii is sandwiched in between two world powers. And so that is the reality that's happening in Ukraine is they're sandwiched between two world powers. They'll never have the independence that they want or think they deserve because of this fact. So, and this is a hard reality of nation states. And it's a sad thing about life, but the kings make decisions that affect nations. And the little guy, the family, the women, the children, the little guy gets pushed around and hurt because of it. And many families are their lives are messed up and screwed up and damaged and destroyed even because of this. So anyway, don't forget to pray for Ukraine. But I would say we should not be going to war over Ukraine. That this is a war that should not have started. If Trump was in office, I firmly believe that we could have been friends with Russia. What we should have done is we should say, hey, the Cold War is over. Let's be friends. And we could have allied ourselves with Russia against China, for instance, against communist China. But oh no, we decided that we were going to be enemies with Russia, destabilize their pro-Russian government in Ukraine, and not care to be friends. So this is a real shame upon the West, and I hope it doesn't turn worse. Now, if we're going to talk biblically, we see Ezekiel 37:38. We see that Russia is rising. Russia is rising. Russia is just going to continue to rise, and God is eventually going to bring Russia into judgment by bringing it to Israel. So I'm not calling these necessary predictions, but I think that there could be a religious zeal to reclaim Istanbul for Russia. And this is, I don't know, I've never heard anybody say this, but I think if you look at St. Vladimir and the Russian kings, they originally had attacked Constantinople. So for what's that worth? Turkey, I saw an article the other day, Turkey's talking about maybe they could attack Greece. Maybe it was just a wild speculation, but we could see Turkey attack Greece and come into alliance with Russia. And then Russia could actually reclaim Istanbul somehow for the Orthodox Church. and then pulled down further south into Israel. So I don't know, that sounds wild and crazy, but back in December of 2001, did you think Russia would have attacked Ukraine? And also, furthermore, did you think in March of 2020, that you would have been locked down for a month or two and been forced to wear masks? Like, no, none of that stuff sounded even logical, but it happened. Anyway, I got to run, but I want to say God bless you guys. Thanks for watching this. Go to my website, MatthewSpencer.tv. Right now, I'm the author of a kid's book called Musical Superheroes, so you can get that on Amazon. I have another book coming out soon called Every Nation Operation. It's a coloring book for our kids program at our church. So anyway, thank you guys for watching. Follow me on MatthewSpencer.tv. If there's anything, leave your comments. If there's anything you're interested in hearing more about, or maybe there's a topic that I, struck a chord with you, leave me a note. And so anyway, see you. Bye-bye.